Hello and welcome back to my channel World History Explored. I am your host Adam Zane, and today we are talking about Omar Mukhtar, the Lion of the Desert, the Libyan schoolteacher who became the most feared guerrilla commander in North Africa and held off the Italian Empire for 20 years. If you enjoy stories of ordinary people who refuse to bow to empires, hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves history as much as you do. Let's get into it. The Boy from the Green Mountain. Our story begins in the rugged highlands of Cyrenaica in eastern Libya, in a region the locals call Jabal al-Akhdar, the Green Mountain. Sometime around 1858, in a small village near Tobruk, a boy named Omar Mukhtar was born into the Mnifa tribe. His father died when Omar was still young, and he grew up in poverty, raised in part by a local sheikh who took the orphaned boy under his wing. This was a hard land, but it was also a deeply spiritual one. Cyrenaica, in the late 19th century, was the heartland of the Senussi order, an Islamic Sufi brotherhood that combined religious devotion with education, trade, and tribal diplomacy. The Senussi had built a network of religious schools called zawiyas across the desert, and it was within this network that young Omar found his calling. He was sent to study at the Senussi University in Jagbub, the order's remote spiritual capital, where he spent 8 years immersed in the Quran, Islamic law, and the teachings of the Senussi masters. He emerged not as a warrior, but as a scholar. Omar became a respected imam and teacher, known for his calm wisdom and his ability to settle disputes between feuding tribes. In a society built on tribal loyalty and frequent conflict over wells, grazing land, and honor, a man who could mediate fairly was worth more than a man who could fight. Nobody, least of all Omar himself, expected this quiet teacher to become the most wanted man in the Italian Empire. But history has a habit of placing extraordinary burdens on unlikely shoulders, and the world around Omar was about to change forever. Empires collide on the fourth shore. To understand why a Quran teacher picked up a rifle, you have to understand what Italy wanted from Libya. By the early 20th century, Italy was a young, insecure nation desperate to prove itself among the great powers of Europe. Britain had Egypt and India. France had Algeria and West Africa. Italy had almost nothing, and Italian nationalists were humiliated by this. They looked across the Mediterranean at Libya, then a loosely controlled province of the weakening Ottoman Empire, and saw their opportunity. Italian propagandists began calling Libya the Fourth Shore, imagining the coastline as a natural extension of Italy itself, just waiting to be claimed. In October 1911, Italy made its move. The Italian Royal Navy sailed to the Libyan coast and issued an ultimatum to the Ottoman authorities in Tripoli: surrender or watch your cities burn. When the Ottomans and their Libyan allies refused and withdrew into the countryside instead, the Italians bombarded Tripoli and Benghazi for 3 days straight. This was the opening shot of the Italo-Turkish War, and it marked the beginning of a struggle that would consume the rest of Omar Mukhtar's life. The Ottomans, stretched thin and fighting on multiple fronts, could not commit major forces to defend a distant province. Instead, Turkish officers worked to enlist local Bedouin tribal fighters into the resistance, and the man chosen to lead these Bedouin allies was Omar Mukhtar. Think about that for a moment. A man whose entire career had been built on religious scholarship and peaceful mediation with no formal military training was now expected to unite fractious desert clans into something resembling an army. His standing within the Senussi order and his deep relationships across the tribes of Cyrenaica made him the natural choice, and he had already gained relevant experience opposing French expansion into Chad between 1900 and 1902, developing a knowledge of desert warfare and his homeland's geography that the Italians simply did not possess. The First War and years of stalemate combined Ottoman and Libyan patriot forces grew rapidly, swelling to an estimated 15,000 fighters by November 1911. They harassed Italian positions around Benghazi, struck at supply lines, and made the occupation of the coastal cities a daily nightmare of ambushes and skirmishes. Omar and his forces played a critical role, employing classic guerrilla tactics, targeting supply lines, cutting communications, and launching sudden strikes on Italian columns before melting back into the desert. The fighting was brutal on both sides, with the resistance also inflicting devastating losses on Italian forces throughout the conflict. By 1912, the wider picture shifted. Italy and the Ottoman Empire signed the Treaty of Auchi, ending their formal war, with Italy returning the Dodecanese Islands in exchange for concessions, including allowing the Ottoman Sultan, as caliph, to retain religious representation in Libya. On paper, Italy had won. In practice, the treaty meant almost nothing to the tribes of Cyrenaica, who had never surrendered. The war the diplomats signed away in Switzerland simply continued in the deserts of North Africa. When the First World War broke out in 1914, the Senussi resistance found new purpose. Omar Mukhtar supported the Ottoman war effort by leading attacks against British forces in neighboring Egypt, extending the fight against European colonialism beyond Libya's borders. This period, the Senussi campaign, ran roughly from 1915 to 1917 and ended with an exhausted resistance negotiating a truce with the British. By the early 1920s, Italy believed it had largely pacified northern Libya, reoccupying most territory north of the Gadames-Mizda Beni Ulid line and controlling roughly 4/5 of the population in Tripolitania and Fezzan. But one place the Italian army could not break was the forested hills of Jebel Akhtar, the Green Mountain, where strong guerrilla resistance continued under Omar Mukhtar, who had now transformed from tribal mediator into the undisputed military commander of the Libyan resistance. The lion learns to roar. What made Omar Mukhtar different from other resistance leaders of his era was not just his courage, but his strategic intelligence. He understood that you do not have to defeat an empire in open battle. You only have to make occupation too costly, exhausting, and humiliating for the empire to sustain. His leadership proved decisive in major engagements such as the fighting around Tripoli and the Battle of Benghazi, victories that rattled the colonial administration and inspired growing numbers of Libyans to join the resistance. His tactics were built around mobility and intimate knowledge of terrain. Mukhtar's forces used Libya's harsh desert landscape to stage surprise attacks, disrupt supply lines, and wear down Italian control over the interior. The Italian military, designed for conventional European warfare, struggled to adapt to an enemy organized into small mobile units the Italians called the Adwar, fighters who knew every wadi, every well, every hidden pass through the mountains and could vanish into the landscape that raised them. Omar also understood the power of morale. His rallying cry, that his people would not surrender, that they would win or die, became a refrain repeated whenever spirits flagged. This was not simply a military campaign, it was a war for the loyalty of an entire population. Civilians paid taxes that funded the resistance, donated weapons, clothing, and food, and provided horses and intelligence on Italian movements. The Italians eventually realized there was no meaningful line between rebel and civilian in Cyrenaica. The entire society was the resistance. By the mid-1920s, the man once known simply as a Senussi scholar had earned a new title from his own people, and grudgingly from his enemies, the Lion of the Desert. Mussolini's fascists escalate the war. Everything changed in 1922, when Benito Mussolini and his National Fascist Party seized power in Rome. Mussolini's rise triggered a dramatic escalation in Italy's approach to Libya, as the new fascist government viewed the unfinished conquest as a national humiliation that needed to be erased. The half measures and negotiated truces of the previous decade were over. In 1923, Italy launched what it called the pacification of Libya, an aggressive campaign designed to crush the resistance through overwhelming force. Italian forces swept through the Sirte Desert using aircraft and motorized transport, technologies the resistance could not match, covering 150,000 square kilometers in 5 months and deliberately cutting off rebel strongholds in Cyrenaica from any support out of Tripolitania. Even so, Omar Mukhtar refused to break. Through the late 1920s, there were periods of uneasy negotiation, including a 1929 agreement with Governor Pietro Badoglio that briefly suggested a path to peace. But negotiations ultimately broke down, and Italy committed itself fully to the complete military conquest of Libya. Italian sources falsely portrayed the truce as Omar's total surrender. Propaganda Badoglio likely encouraged hoping to demoralize the wider resistance. It did not work. By late October 1929, Omar publicly denounced the compromise and rebuilt unity among Libyan forces, preparing for the final decisive phase of the war. It was at this moment that Mussolini's regime brought in the man who would become Omar Mukhtar's most ruthless adversary. His strategy was systematic. He shut down the Islamic zawiyas, the very institutions that had shaped Omar's own early life, deporting their scholars to the Italian prison island of Ustica and seizing their lands outright, with hundreds of houses and 70,000 hectares of prime land changing hands. He ordered the complete disarmament of civilians, with execution as punishment for anyone caught supporting the resistance, and purged the colonial administration and Libyan colonial battalions of anyone suspected of sympathizing with Omar's fighters. Graziani's most devastating weapon was the concentration camp system. The plan, endorsed by Badoglio de Bono and Mussolini himself, called for forcibly relocating roughly 100,000 people from Jebel Akhdar into coastal camps while sealing the Libyan-Egyptian border to choke off outside help. Tens of thousands of civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, were forced into these camps where thousands died of starvation, disease, and neglect. A 200-mile barbed wire fence went up along the Egyptian border, and in a horrifying escalation, the Italian Air Force resorted to chemical weapons against guerrilla forces in the open desert. This was not conventional warfare. This was an attempt to erase a society's ability to resist by destroying the social fabric that sustained it. And historians today have not hesitated to call Italy's reconquest of Cyrenaica genocidal. A massive Italian offensive in June 1930 failed to break the resistance outright, but the broader strategy of starvation, isolation, and terror began taking its toll. Through early 1931, the rebels found themselves increasingly cut off from reinforcements, hunted from the air, betrayed by informers, and pursued relentlessly on the ground. The Lion of the Desert was being cornered, but he would not go quietly. The final battle. By the late summer of 1931, Omar Mukhtar was around 73 years old, having fought in one form or another for 2 decades. His forces were depleted, his sanctuaries destroyed, his civilian support base locked behind barbed wire, and still he continued to fight. On September 11, 1931, his struggle reached its end when he was wounded in battle near Slanta and captured by Libyan Savary cavalry serving within the Italian colonial army. A bitter detail given that fellow Libyans, not Italians, finally brought him down. According to accounts of his capture, Omar faced his fate with remarkable composure, accepting his coming sentence with the words, "From God we came, and to God we must return." He was given what the Italians called a trial, but as a captured guerrilla leader who had broken a prior truce, he was denied recognition as a prisoner of war and instead subjected to a rapid military tribunal. The verdict was never in doubt. On September 16, 1931, with explicit hopes that Libyan resistance would die alongside him, Omar Mukhtar was hanged before his own followers at the Soluch concentration camp. He was 73 years old. Even General Graziani, the man most responsible for hunting him down, could not help but describe his adversary with something approaching respect, recalling a man of medium height and stout build, with white hair, beard, and mustache. It is a strange and telling detail that the conqueror's own words preserved a portrait of dignity in his enemy, even while ordering his execution. The lion cannot be caged. Italy hanged Omar Mukhtar in public specifically to break the will of the Libyan resistance. In the immediate aftermath, organized guerrilla resistance effectively ended, and by January 1932, Badoglio formally proclaimed the pacification campaign complete. Several of Mukhtar's closest aides were executed the following year. From a purely military standpoint, Italy had won and would go on to unify Libya's 3 historic regions, Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, and Fezzan, proclaiming Italian Libya in 1939. But here is where the story transcends the simple math of who controlled which territory. Rather than extinguishing resistance, his martyrdom strengthened the broader independence movement, inspiring Libyans for the next 2 decades, right up until the country achieved full independence on December 24, 1951. The Italian colonial project itself did not long outlast him in any meaningful sense. After Italy's defeat in the Second World War, the country lost its colonial empire entirely, and Libya passed under British administration before achieving independence. The Lion of the Desert had been killed, but the idea he represented, that a colonized people could organize, resist, and ultimately outlast an empire, could not be hanged alongside him. A legacy carved in currency and memory. The way a nation remembers its heroes tells you what that nation values. When Muammar Gaddafi seized power in the 1969 coup and later redesigned the country's currency, he chose to feature Omar Mukhtar's portrait on the banknotes rather than his own, a portrait that has appeared on the Libyan 10-dinar note continuously since 1971. In 2009, during a state visit to Rome, Gaddafi made an unmistakable statement by wearing a photograph of Omar Mukhtar in Italian captivity pinned to his chest, bringing along Mukhtar's own elderly son, a pointed gesture insisting Italy reckon with the history it had spent decades minimizing. Mukhtar's story also reached global audiences through the 1981 film Lion of the Desert, starring Anthony Quinn, financed in part by Gaddafi's government to challenge the official Italian narrative. Despite a prestigious cast and direction by Mustafa Akkad, the film was banned in Italy as defamatory and was not broadcast on Italian public television until 2009, marking the first time Italy publicly grappled with this chapter of its colonial past. Today, Omar Al-Mukhtar University, founded in 1961, carries his name into Libya's educational system, a fitting tribute given that he began his own life as a teacher. There is something profoundly human about Omar Mukhtar's story that separates it from a simple tale of battles and dates. He did not set out to become a general. He set out to be a teacher, a man who settled disputes over water rights and grazing land, who taught children to read the Quran in a small desert school. History placed an empire in his path, and rather than retreat into his books, he carried the burden his community needed him to carry for 20 years until his very last breath. The Italians who hunted him for 2 decades, who burned his sanctuaries, imprisoned his people, and finally hanged him before his own followers, could capture the man. They could never capture what he represented. Empires are built on the assumption that the colonized will eventually accept their fate. Omar Mukhtar's entire life was a refutation of that assumption, and that, more than any single battle he won, is why his face still looks out from Libyan currency today, nearly a century after the rope was pulled tight at Solok. If you enjoyed this look into the life of the Lion of the Desert, make sure to subscribe to World History Explored for more deep dives into the resistance movements, empires, and forgotten heroes that shaped our world. Drop a comment below and let me know what corner of history you want me to explore next. Until then, remember that the stories empires try hardest to erase are usually the ones most worth telling. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.